Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So as I said, I'm from the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and today we'll be talking about teaching youth about COVID-19 and how we can support young people to learn about COVID-19, how to keep themselves safe, how to protect their families and communities, as we also experience this intense historical time. Again, my name is Katherine Blanchard, and I'm our program manager for leadership development and international programming. I was one of the co-authors of the COVID-19 materials that we'll be talking about today. And I also have been managing a lot of the dissemination, which is why I'm here with all of you today. And I'm joined by our director, Dr. Carol O'Donnell, who will definitely be super active in the chat, even if she can't get her audio to work, to join me in presenting today. So feel free to populate any of your questions in there, and I'm sure she will be happy to answer them. So a couple of the Zoom meeting features that I just want everyone to be aware of. You can put yourself on mute, which I think you all came in on mute, and with your videos off. But please do use the chat box, and there will be some time where we can probably have an opportunity to chat a little bit. This is a nice sized group for any questions that you have. So feel free to put those questions in the chat box, or I think there might be a raise hand option as well. Okay, so today's session, we've got 3 objectives for the session today. First of all, to discover how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your work experiences and your interactions. To understand what resources exist from the Smithsonian Science Education Center to support young people around the topic of COVID-19. And finally, acting to define strategies that engage young people to make an impact in their community. So I'd like to start off with something a little bit interactive, which hopefully will get everyone kind of the brains going. I know this is about, that slump in the mid-morning. So we're going to start by mapping your identity, which is indeed an activity from our COVID-19 module, as well as from our other Smithsonian Science for Global Goals module. So if you have a piece of paper nearby, or if you just want to pull up a Word document on your computer, or write down in your notebook, step 1 is to write your name in the middle of a fresh page or fresh section. And then go ahead and put a circle around your name, or identify it or mark it in some other way. I'll give you just a moment to do that. All right, so once you've got your name and a circle around it, I'd like you to go ahead and answer the question, who am I, or what characteristics make me up? And you can use the following list of categories that I've included here, which includes things like your age, your gender, your nationality, what role you play in your family, parent, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, things you like to do, hobbies and interests, or anything else that you can think of. So this is really open-ended. There's no set amount that you have to use of characteristics. Just take a couple of minutes and go ahead and write some things down on your identity map. And I'll give you a moment or two to do that uninterrupted. So I'm going to give you about another 30 seconds to add anything else to your identity map. Remember, this doesn't have to be complete, but you can go as deeply as you'd like to here. And as you go ahead and finish up writing down some items on your identity map, I am going to show you my identity map. And this is actually a physical identity map that I made with objects from around my home. And was an opportunity to kind of pay homage to the Smithsonian and our collections of curated objects. So these are some things that I curated. You can see sort of down on the left-hand corner, there's my passport. My favorite animals are elephants. And I also have my kindergarten graduation tassel because education is incredibly important to me. And then on the right there, you have my dog, who I had to Photoshop in because she's a little new. She's only been with us for about 3 months and she's not good at sitting or staying yet. So she was not willing to get into my physical identity map that I took a picture of. So this is just another kind of example of a way that you could represent some of this information. So now what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about which item on your identity map is most essential to your sense of self in this moment. And the only thing on your map that you can't choose is your name. And then I will ask you to circle it and share it in the chat box. So when you share it in the chat box, I'd love for you to include your name, your organization, and whatever role you play there, and then that item from your identity map. And I'll give you just a moment to start sharing those in the chat box, and then I will hopefully read out some of your answers. And I realize you might need an extra moment or two to choose the item. All right. We've got someone whose item is humble, learner, mom for sure, especially if you're juggling any kids who are currently home and not going to school full time. Ooh, artist. All right, Riva's a sister and an aunt. Mike is a dad. All right, lots of these nice family connections. I love that. All right, Diana is a college student. Fantastic. All right, Lavon is a coach. Janet's a grandma. This is fantastic, y'all. I really love this. I think one of my favorite parts is that so many of these roles that you're including here, like kindergarten teacher, mom, coach, they're all roles that really support other people. And I think that that's a really powerful group and network to be a part of. Jalen is a dog mom. Same, Jalen. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. All right. Thank you all so much for sharing this. This is really powerful. I really love hearing from all of you. Okay, so if you haven't yet put your information in the chat box, feel free to add it. But I am gonna kind of plow forward. All right, Riva is a ginger, love that. I don't know if you love like the spice of ginger or if you happen to be a redhead. Okay, so I'm gonna plow ahead and kind of debrief some of this for us. So when you're thinking about your identity, some of the focus questions that we certainly like to use with young people, but that I think are also really good for us to think about in this particular context are how might your personal identity influence how you teach or educate about COVID-19? And then how might your students or the young people that you work with, how might their identities influence their experience with COVID-19? So if you have any thoughts on this, you can feel free to add that in the chat, but it's also just kind of food for thought in this moment as we're kind of starting out here early in this presentation. So I think that, you know, any time that we're talking about our experiences as educators or as, you know, community outreach workers and activists, we're thinking about, you know, what is the personal part of this that's, you know, a driver for us. And a lot of you kind of included some of that in the items from your identity. But it's also so important to think about where the people that we're working with come from, what their perspective is as well. All right, so now I am going to take a pause for reflection. And in just a moment, I'm going to send you to a website called Padlet. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Padlet, but I think it's a really nice way to kind of bring that, that sort of digital interaction to a new level. We're going to show you the Padlet link in just a second, but what I'm going to ask you to do is answer 2 questions that are on there. The first is, when thinking about the next steps that your organization is taking with COVID-19, what are you most concerned about? And the second is, what opportunities do you see? So I'll give you the Padlet link in just a second. All right, it's in the chat box now. There's no need to log in if you already have a Padlet. You can totally be anonymous, but you can also read through other people's responses and feel free to respond to their comments. So here's a QR code if you want to do it on your phone. The link for the Padlet is also in the chat box, so you can feel free to move there now. And I'll give you a moment or two to navigate your way there. On the bottom of the column, there's a little plus sign. You just click on that, and that's how you create a new comment. And working behind the scenes today, we have my colleague Alexa Mock, who is our technical wizard at the moment, and she will be navigating us to Padlet and helping us to share out some of that information. All right, looks like we've got some great responses coming up already in terms of what we're most concerned about: keeping kids engaged in a constantly changing environment, COVID spread and the effect it may have on vulnerable and immunocompromised family members. Absolutely, not just in like my own family, but in others' families as well. I definitely feel that one. Ooh, students are coming in with the attitudes that their parents show at home about masks. I love that comment. I think that that's a really important kind of conversation that we're having about how we carry those values with us different places. Keeping kids safe while also keeping ourselves safe and engaged. Concerns about having school shut down again. Yeah, that's definitely very real. I feel that one for sure. Keeping staff on board with kids in person and virtually. And I think that that sort of transition between virtual and in person it's a tough line to straddle, definitely. Alexa, can we look at some of the opportunities? Right. The opportunity to teach youth about safety. Yeah, I think that's great. And that's definitely something that really resonates with us. New ways to engage students and adults, and not just new ways to engage them, but also ways to engage new populations is something that I've really been impressed with. The strength of working as a team and adapting each day as new things come up. I think that that's so important. You know, so much of it's really like proven to me, like I knew that my team that I work with is amazing, but this has taken it to a new level for sure. To redesign programs and reimagine services. Yeah, I think that that's super important. I think that in some ways, COVID has given us kind of this space and time to think and process and figure out exactly what we want to do. And in some ways, it's just been responding to whatever happens next, for sure. Being able to talk about needing personal space. Yeah, that's a good one. I'd love to kind of unpack that and know more about what you're thinking there, but I think that that's a great kind of topic about boundaries in general. Yep. All right. Thank you all for responding here. I'm going to leave this Padlet up. We're going to keep adding to it over the course of our presentation. But for now, I'm going to head back to the PowerPoint. And as I do that, one second, I just want to get myself all ready to go. I am going to dive into the background on Smithsonian Science for Global Goals. And Carol, do you have audio and want to take over here, or do you want me to just forge ahead?
Sure, I'll do this section. That would be great.
Fantastic.
Thank
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Katherine. So for those of you who may be familiar with this, the UN developed a set of sustainable development goals in 2015 that are 15-year goals with the hope of achieving these very lofty goals by 2030. And according to the UN, the word sustainable means development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that's an important definition from UNESCO, which is part of the UN, because of the fact that it takes the understanding the perspective of others to be able to recognize that what we do and the actions that we take don't just influence us as individuals, but they influence others as well. And one of the reasons why Katherine took you through this identity mapping activity is because in order to be able to become someone who has a sustainability mindset, you have to be able to not only think about yourself, but think about others, have a sense of perspective taking in order to be able to understand that what you're doing today does have influence on others today, but also has an influence on the future. So what we did was we started a project called the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals project in 2016, 1 year after the UN Sustainable Development Goals came out. And these goals, these 17 goals, as we said, are fairly lofty. There are 17 of them. And as you can see, they range from no poverty, zero hunger, to good health and well-being, including nutrition and food, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, but lots of science in there. Clean energy, climate action, life below water, which is goal 14, life on land, which is goal 15, sustainable cities and communities, which is goal 11, clean water and sanitation, goal 6. And then of course, one of the most important, and I assume you would agree, is quality education, making sure that everyone on the planet has access to quality education. The goals, so somebody just asked Katherine if they're supposed to be able to see the slides, and a couple people are saying they don't see the screen at all.
Let me try to reshare. All right, some people are seeing it, some people are not. I'm gonna just stop sharing and reshare again.
Okay.
Is that better? Are folks seeing things now?
Great. It looks like it's working now.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, super. So these sustainable development goals, and there are 17 of them, which were adopted in 2015, are fairly lofty at a high level when you look at them in this context of the 17, but underlying them are 232 sub-indicators. And what we did was we extracted from the sustainable development goals all of that amazing science and made a decision to educate youth on the underlying science of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And embedded within goal 3, good health and well-being, is the understanding about pandemics. And so we didn't recognize we'd be living in one, but the idea of educating youth on a pandemic at a time when you're experiencing it is the goal. So the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals project, which builds off of these UN Sustainable Development Goals, is a proposed set of 15 to 17 different modules, and each one builds on many different UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have available, for example, mosquito. How can we ensure good health for all from mosquito-borne disease? And that happened because Zika at the time was really prevalent, and the US was very concerned about Zika in 2016. And so we developed that with the hope that we could educate youth on what was happening to them at this time. The second one, food, how can we ensure good nutrition for all? That was released in December of 2019, which deals with issues from nutrition and nutritional needs, not only on a national level, but a global level, but also this idea of food security. food insecurity, food deserts. We're developing right now 2 new modules called biodiversity, and the second, sustainable cities, which we actually just changed to sustainable communities. And each of those is built around the Sustainable Development Goals. The framework, the learning framework that we use to guide our work is called the Global Goals Action Progression. Katherine, myself, and our good colleagues, Heidi Gibson, Andre Radloff, Jean Flanagan, Brian Mandel, we developed this framework to guide our work. And this framework is transferable to anyone who is interested in using it. It is we take a transdisciplinary approach to learning, which is that we integrate science, technology, engineering, and math with social emotional learning, global sustainability, and civic engagement. It is a combination of basically taking disciplines and combining them in the way in which no singular discipline outshines the other. So the framework says that students come into the classroom with a particular learning disposition, and they also come to class with a particular cultural context or background and set of understandings or knowledge that they bring with them to the class. Traditionally, science classrooms engaged in what was green on there, having students question, explore a problem, and investigate it. And our basically premise is that that's not enough. We want students to also, as many of our state science standards say, to think critically and to reason, but also to understand the issue systemically. And then from there, synthesize the information and use it to do social good, to act, to change their local actions in order to, contribute to global actions. And all of this is in the context of building their sustainability mindsets and their scientific literacy. So what do we mean by a sustainability mindset? This is this idea that students start to recognize that what they do on a local scale, engaged in local actions and making local decisions in what many call place-based learning, actually will contribute to global impacts. And so that's what you hear when you hear someone say a global local interconnection, or some folks say global. In addition, surrounding that global local interconnection is this idea of developing students or giving students this sense of agency, helping them develop their agency and their empowerment, approaching this from this lens of equity and justice, and making certain that students are given opportunities for reflection and open-mindedness. So I mentioned this transdisciplinary approach to learning. We believe that students should learn from researchers around the world working on a specific sustainable development goal related issue or problem, like a pandemic, COVID-19, or like a mosquito-borne disease, like Zika, and that those researchers might have very different perspectives on the issue and come from very different fields. In addition, we want students to carry out local investigations on the same problem, using their community as their laboratory. So again, very place-based learning. Examining the problem through multiple perspectives, social, environmental, economic, ethical, and then taking local action to address a global issue, but from their community's perspective. And so under this framework, the Global Goals Action Progression, within the project Smithsonian Science for Global Goals, which is focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, when the pandemic hit, we made the decision to develop a place-based module called How Can I Protect Myself and Others, COVID-19. It's available free, as all the modules are, on our website that you see here. It was created in collaboration with the World Health Organization and the Inter-Academy Partnership, which is made up of 140 different countries who have national academies of sciences, engineering, and medicine, along with the Smithsonian, of course. It's available in 24 different languages to help support students who are learning at home with their families, who may not necessarily be speaking English in their home. And so it's hopefully adaptable, that it can be used with a caregiver or a family member. So this particular module, which is COVID-19, How Do I Protect Myself and Others, addresses 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, which you see here. And so now I'm going to turn it back over to Katherine, and she's going to take you through the 7 tasks that make up the COVID-19, how can I protect myself and others? Katherine?
Thanks so much, Carol. Thank you for that, that great overview that really sets the scene for what we're talking about today, which is our COVID-19 module, How Can I Protect Myself and Others? So this particular module, is really built around the questions that students had about COVID-19 and some of the concerns that they brought up as we were kind of talking to them at the beginning of the pandemic. So things like, when will it be safe to go back to school? What do I do if someone won't wear a mask? Will a cloth mask work? Do I need an N95 mask or other PPE? Will hand washing work for me if I have long nails? And so what we did was we worked to structure a module that really helped to address some of these questions that young people were coming with. And we put together 7 tasks, which really cover some of these broad overarching questions, such as what's happening in the world right now, how can keeping distance from others help, how can washing our hands protect us, how can staying informed about the problem help, and ultimately getting to that point of what actions can I take right now. So over the next couple of slides, you'll notice the sequence of discover, understand, and act. So this is a sequence that you'll see throughout every task. Oh, it looks like some people are having trouble with the sound. I'm going to go ahead and mute and unmute and see if that gets better. Can folks hear me now? All right, got a couple. All right. And I did see someone that said if you're having trouble with sound, you might try calling in through the call-in number. All right, so you'll see this discover, understand, act progression, and you'll see this within every activity, every task that we have. But you'll also see this over the course of the module as a whole. So starting out by discovering the answers to the questions that are in your own environment, questions that you have, understanding the science and social science that underlies these questions and really creating that foundation of knowledge. And then acting on this knowledge, sharing that information, sharing what you learned with your family, your community, to really support the safety and protection of everyone in your sphere. All right, so now let's dive into the tasks. We've got 7 tasks to go through. I will take a break about halfway through and ask if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to dig into a little bit more. So task 1 starts with what's happening in the world right now. And the discover portion of this is focused on how life is changing during COVID-19. So this is where we ask young people to have a conversation, maybe with a parent or a peer, another trusted adult, about what their experiences have been, how they're feeling, and that helps to kind of unpack some of these challenging emotions, really helps to kind of understand where kids' heads are at as well. The understand portion, you actually already did today. That's where our identity map comes in. So focusing on how I would describe myself and how I would describe what I already know about the COVID-19 pandemic. So then in our ACT section, we start to hone in on things we can do to feel safe in this moment. So in some ways that those things are things that we're already doing. So things that are routine in our lives, maybe a morning routine or an evening routine, maybe gathering with your family for dinner or breakfast, ways that make you feel kind of safe and normal in this moment. But then are there maybe new things that we can add to our repertoire? So that includes some things like maybe breathing exercises, recalling back to a favorite book or movie that you like to watch when you're feeling unsteady. And also the concept that knowing more about a problem or a challenge is one way to help us to feel safer. Because the more that we know in an age-appropriate, context-appropriate way, the better that we can protect ourselves and the more safe that we can be.
So Katherine, can I add one thing before you head on to the next task?
For sure,
but I'll wait until you're finished.
You'll see throughout this module that we have both emotional safety tips and physical safety tips. Emotional safety tips are an important time to maybe call in a parent or a guardian or another trusted adult to help kind of talk through maybe what was scary, what was challenging. And the physical safety tips are really focused on keeping ourselves safe as we go through some of these activities, making sure that we're still following our public health best practices and that we're keeping ourselves safe within our communities. Carol, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I wanted to point out that the science in this module is not extensively difficult because this is designed for ages 8 to 17 on a wide range, and really for caregivers and for teachers as well, and community members to learn the most basic underlying science of protective behaviors. And the image that you see in the bottom right-hand corner is actually an image from the CDC of the actual virus itself, which is called SARS-CoV-2. And we do share with students that basic understanding. So this is its structure. We share with them that this SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that carries the disease, but the disease itself is called COVID-19, and that name came from COVID, coronavirus, and D, disease, and was first discovered, at least at the time, in December of 2019. And so we do help students understand that kind of basic scientific knowledge, but the science is not overly extensive.
Great, thank you, Carol. And we'll dive into the science in the next couple of sections. Jumping right into task number 2. This task is focused on the public health practice of social distancing or physical distancing. And here we start out with a discover section is what do you really notice about people keeping distance from others, and what are the people in your household doing to keep their distance from others. Then in the understand section, we think about why distancing is important. So this is where we actually learn what a respiratory droplet is, how it works. So one of the activities we ask kiddos to do is if you have a phone screen or a cup or something else nearby, you can breathe onto it. And then you can actually feel the moisture that is there on that surface. That's a great way to kind of visualize what a respiratory droplet is. Every time we talk, breathe, sneeze, cough, we are sending those out into the world. And so that's why we are keeping ourselves farther away from others. The other thing that we do in this activity is we simulate how a respiratory droplet actually moves. So I actually have a spray bottle right here. So I'm going to put a little bit of water on my hands. And then if I were doing this activity, I would stand away from a wall, great outdoor activity, and flick this water and see how far it goes. And start, a meter away from the wall, and then start moving back a little bit farther to see how far you can simulate those respiratory droplets moving. So a great way to kind of think about how much distance we should be keeping from each other. And I've got some great pictures here. My fiance is from Florida, and they suggest that you keep one medium alligator apart from each other, which I thought was a very nice way to visualize about how far one should be. Then in the ACT section, we get to how you might share or communicate this to those in your home or other people in your community. So in task number 3, we move into the public health practice of wearing masks or covering our noses and mouths and how that can help protect us. So the discover section, much like the previous task, is focused on what people in your life are doing right now. Are they covering their mouths and noses? Why are they doing this? Why is that important to them? And then in the understand section, we build off of the task 2 activity of flicking water. But in this case, we put a cloth between us and whatever wall we're flicking water against. So this is actually a mask that I've been wearing that I could use for this, but you could also use, a pillowcase, a washcloth, a tea towel, anything that can kind of simulate that barrier that a mask would provide between your respiratory droplets and the other person that's standing on the other side of your piece of cloth. And then in the ACT section, we dive in again to how you might share and communicate this information to others, how you might share it with those in your home, how you might help them to understand why wearing masks is important. And you'll see these 3 pictures here. I pulled these from a great LA Times article about masks around the world. So you've got this woman on the left who's wearing both a mask and a face shield. You've got the fellow in the middle who I believe is in Morocco, and his mask is made out of fig leaves, which apparently contain antiviral properties. And then we've got another comic book superhero mask wearer on the right there.
Yeah, and Katherine, I just wanted to add one thing, because what I really love about the images is that in each one of them, you clearly see that these individuals are wearing the mask over both their nose and their mouth. And
yep.
While my picture is really little, the image behind me is of 2 brass monkeys, chimps actually, at our National Zoo. They both have masks on, and yet one of the chimps is wearing a mask only over his mouth. And so his nose is exposed. And I think what I really like about task 2 is that task 2, when they breathe on their phone or their mirror, they see clearly that the respiratory droplets come out of your nose when you breathe, even if your mouth is closed. And so it's really important. And we see this all the time in images on TV of people with masks, but they're wearing them over their mouths. And so it's really crucial when you're working with young children that you help them understand that they should be wearing the mask over their nose and their mouth at the same time because of those respiratory droplets.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So now we'll move into task 4, which is about hand washing and the public health measure of washing our hands, which, to be clear, is always in fashion, regardless of if there's a pandemic or not. So in this case, we'll actually ask young people to simulate the virus itself. So the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus contains an outer layer that is made of like sort of a fatty, it's like called a lipid bilayer. So it's this fatty outside surface. And basically, we ask them to simulate what that sort of outer fatty layer is like through the use of cooking oil or butter or ghee or something else that's kind of an oily substance. So to do that, we ask them to spread that material on like the inside of an arm or someplace where the skin is a little bit softer, and then try to rinse it off with just water, see if it comes off. Take a little bit of soap on your fingers, rub it once or twice, try and rinse it off, see if it comes off. And then take some real good soap and water, nice and sudsy, and try and rinse it off and see if it comes off then. So essentially what happens and what we're helping students to simulate here is that when you have this fatty layer and you use soap, that soap actually breaks the fatty layer apart. And when it does that, all that genetic material that's inside the middle of the virus spills out, and the virus is no longer intact, and the virus is no longer dangerous. So by using simple soap and water, we have the ability to, really destroy that virus. So every time you wash your hands, you can feel like a virus fighter. And there's also, proper ways to wash your hands, which we definitely refer to the World Health Organization hand washing protocol, but also many local areas now have their own hand washing protocol as well that we encourage folks to use. All right, so that's the sort of understand the middle portion here. Discover is once again, seeing kind of what's going on already. And then act is really focused on how you can share what you learned about hand washing. All right, so I am going to take a brief pause at the end of task 4 here before we move into the last 3 tasks and see if there are any kind of general questions or any questions about the specific tasks. Alexa has been dropping the information to get the COVID-19 module into the chat box, and also sharing some broader information about our global goals modules. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat box. I'll pause for a moment or two and see if anyone has any thoughts. Okay.
Katherine, can I add just one thing?
Of course.
You know, it's interesting because I just want to say this. Katherine is one of the authors, the co-authors on this module. There were 3 people, Andre Radloff, Katherine Blanchard, and Logan Schmidt. And I remember the first time I read the module, just, you know, doing my kind of first pass of the review. And I went to my kitchen and I put that oil on my hand. And I tried the activity. I tried to get the oil off just by rubbing. I tried to get the oil off just with water. Then I tried to get the oil off with the soap and water, and it didn't come off right away, but I had to get to that 20 seconds to 40 seconds to get it off. And I have to tell you, from that moment on, every time I washed my hands, thinking I'm trying to protect myself, I could think about that activity. I remembered that activity. So we feel, you know, our premise is that by having students discover these answers for themselves through their actions, that we will promote and encourage long-term behavior because it is a very physical interaction with the idea or with the concept. So it does make a difference.
Thanks, Carol. So I'm going to jump to task 5. We have a question about whether these slides will be shared. Yes, we can definitely do that. You're welcome to email us if you need the slides directly. Otherwise, we'll share them with the event organizers. So task number 5 is focused on how is COVID-19 impacting families and communities. And this is where we you know, keep moving with those public health measures, but also start to bring in some of the psychosocial supports as well. So to discover in this section, we start thinking about how we're protecting people in our community from COVID-19. So we've talked about social distancing, we've talked about wearing masks and washing hands. So as people from your household or who you see on a regular basis are going out into the community, what actions are they taking to keep themselves safe? And are there reasons for going out into the community super important? Maybe you have children whose parents are, you know, frontline healthcare workers or essential workers, you know, doing things like stocking grocery shelves or providing deliveries. Those are essential jobs. Those are jobs that are keeping our society running. But, you know, if maybe you're going to the nail salon or your brother's going to play with 5 of his friends, are those activities that are maybe putting us all in danger? And that's something that, you know, certainly households and communities and friend circles are going to have to grapple with individually. So in the understand section, we really get to the point of thinking about who we're coming into contact with. And this is something that you could even do right now if you still have a piece of paper in front of you. So you start by you know, putting yourself at the top of that piece of paper, this little guy here. So this is me. And then I've got 3 people down below. So you know, maybe that's your mom, your dad, and the mailman that you talked to yesterday. You know, I went to the doctor yesterday and I saw 2 people there. So in addition to my family, I have those people. And so that first tier there is your primary contacts. Those are the people that you have directly been coming into contact with in the past 24 hours or in the past week. You can decide how long you're going to do this contact tracing map. The second layer, so that layer at the bottom there, is your secondary contacts. So in order to find out who you've had secondary contact with, you'll want to call or reach out to the people that you had the initial contact with and see who they have come into contact with since you saw them last. And so this is a great way to kind of, first of all, visually and mathematically demonstrate how many people we all come into contact with. But second of all, a great way for us to kind of understand the process of contact tracing and why that would be such an important public health measure sort of across the board to help us understand how many people we're engaging with, how many people we're coming into contact with, how many people we're potentially infecting if this virus we're in us at the moment when we come into contact with those others. That is sort of the powerful understand activity from this section. And then as we move into ACT, we start thinking about what the repercussions of this virus might be in our own home or our own community. So, is there a way to make a plan if someone in our house becomes ill? Are there already people in our community who have been sick, who are currently sick, who are maybe scared or feel responsible? And how do we kind of support them through that process as well?
So Katherine, could I add a personal anecdote here for just a second? So, so for everyone's knowledge, I have 4 adult children. And one of my adult sons contracted COVID-19. And he, of course, immediately told everyone that he had come in direct contact with, which included my husband and myself and 2 of our other children. And so we were primary contacts. And again, because of this, and I'm being very honest here, Katherine, because of this module, immediately I understood the concept of contact tracing. I made certain that I told my other children and my husband, we have to find out who were you in contact with, even if you may have socially distanced or had a mask on, who were you in contact with, and you must call them on the phone, let them know. So we engaged in contact tracing as a family. And there were quite a few people that we had to reach out to let them know. Then we all of the direct contacts, all the primary contacts had to go get tested. And then we had to tell the people who we came in contact with if we also tested positive. And if we didn't test positive, then our secondary contacts didn't need to get tested as well. And that's why you hear so much about testing and contact tracing. So testing and tracing are crucial in our understanding of protecting others from the spread of the disease. And this activity very much helped me understand that.
Thanks for sharing that, Carol. And I think that one of the challenges that a lot of our public health officials have seen is that people aren't answering the phone for the contact tracers. People don't want to, give their personal information or things like that. But if we can help our youth to understand why this is a crucial piece of fighting the COVID-19 virus, then we can also hope that they will share that knowledge with their families. And so I think that there's a really real opportunity to create a much bigger impact than just the youth that we're interacting with.
And while we don't mention this in the module, there are now new apps that you can download to your phone that tell you whether or not you were in contact with anybody that may have been diagnosed with COVID-19. A little bit scary, but they exist as well.
All right. So as we kind of turn away from the public health practices, we'll shift our focus to news and media literacy. Task number 6 is focused on how you can stay informed about the problem and how that can help both you and your community. So we start by thinking about all that information that's coming at us. And, there's a lot of research and data out there that a lot of that information is false. The Secretary General of the World Health Organization refers to it as the infodemic, so that kind of epidemic of information. The Discover section here is really kind of focusing on where people in your home and where people in your friend group or your community are getting their information about COVID-19. And then the second is understanding how we can identify trustworthy information sources. So first of all, what is a trustworthy information source? Who is the original source of the information that you're receiving? Is it up to date? Is it from a credible website or a credible organization? And is it presented in a way that is not being sensationalized? So I've got three kind of news sources that I've seen information from here. In the center, in the middle there, I've got the Self-Preservation Society, which is, this was a post that they made on Facebook at the beginning of the pandemic, that coronavirus is a hoax, we're being manipulated with fear, don't give in to the propaganda, just live your life the way that you always have. And this, if you are a fairly scientifically literate person, at this point in time, with over 200,000 people in the United States having died of COVID-19, I think we can identify that it is indeed not a hoax. And so that post sat on Facebook for a number of days. It wasn't taken down. It wasn't identified as false or misleading information, which meant a lot of people were seeing that. A lot of people were, absorbing and digesting that information, regardless of if they knew it was valid or invalid. So that's a challenging one. On the top right there, the turquoise screen is a Instagram story about herd immunity. So I'm too old for TikTok. I don't know if that's actually true. I might not be too old for TikTok, but I feel too old for TikTok. So I get most of my my social media information from Instagram. This particular Instagram story was talking about herd immunity and the concept of herd immunity and whether it's a viable option or not. And based on this slide, you can't really tell where that information is coming from. You can't see many of the details about it. But this particular slide is from a nurse who is also on her pandemic response team at the hospital she works at, and she's a really great science communicator. So the next slide talks about why herd immunity is a bad idea. And then the slide after that features links and a bibliography of credible scientific sources. So she is coming with all of this backed up information, providing it to people in bite-sized amounts. And then at the bottom, we have a Scientific American article about how COVID-19 spreads through the air. And there's been so much new research about COVID-19 and how it spreads, how these respiratory droplets might linger in the air. But this particular article, if you look at the very bottom of the screen, is from May 12th. So it's almost 5 months old at this point in time. So we have a lot of new research and data since May about how COVID-19 spreads through the air. So even if you're looking at a credible source, even if you're looking at something that is super relevant, super credible, there's this potential that the information may be outdated. So in the ACT section of task number 6, we move on to making a plan. So how do you stay informed about this information moving forward? How do you evaluate those sources? How do you support others to do that as well? All right, so on to our last task here. Task number 7 is both the most straightforward and the most challenging. So this task is about what actions can you take right now. So Discover, you kind of review everything that you've learned over the past 6 tasks and think about what from that you'd like to include in your action plan. And Understand, we come to explore what only doing one of these items would look like. So if we only washed our hands, what impact would that have? Would it be enough? It actually probably wouldn't be enough. We need all pieces of that all pieces of that plan, all those actions to be an integrated action plan like this 3-stranded rope that you see here. Everything taken together to make our plan and our actions stronger. And then in the act section, it's really about communicating and disseminating your plan. So how will I let my family, friends, and community know what I'm planning to do, what we need to do to keep ourselves safe, and help to turn them into advocates for that work as well. All right, so that is the breakdown of our topics, or of our COVID-19 module. Here are some frequently asked questions that we get about the module. I think a lot of these we've kind of answered as we've gone along. What ages is it designed for? 8 to 17 years old. Can children do this at home? Yes, it's a great intergenerational project. It's also something that can be done, when we're in that in-between space of, are we going to go back to school? Are we not? Are we doing a hybrid model? So we can help kind of get everyone up to speed on COVID-19 and make sure we're all kind of working from the same knowledge base. And then there's a little bit about sort of language and translation down here as well. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to pause for some more reflection. I'm going to send you back to the Padlet that we used at the beginning, and I've added a new column there. How can you use this material in your work? So I want you to take a moment or 2 or 5 to make some quick notes about what really resonated with you, what you'd like to maybe try and incorporate into your own work. Also, if there's anything that you were like, I'd really love to do this with students, but I'm not sure if I can, maybe that can go in there too, and we can kind of help to brainstorm and think about it as a group. So Alexa's dropped the Padlet link into the chat box. I'm also going to put up the QR code here if you'd prefer that method. And in just a moment, I will ask Alexa to pull up that Padlet so we can take a look at how we are kind of processing all of this. All right. All right, so someone suggests doing the 7 tasks 1 day at a time with youth you're working with. That's great. The material takes I would say 8 to 12 hours to do start to finish. Some of the tasks I think I would actually recommend that task 1 and task 6 be broken up into 2 days just because they're kind of long. All right, trying the oil activity to show students how important it is to wash their hands. Love that. The hands-on nature of the activities, definitely. And that they're practical. I think that was a really important thing to us when we were developing this, is that it became something that people could do in a really low resource way. So, most of the things, I think all of the things that you need to do these activities you have around the house for the most part, but also that they have that immediate impact. You understand why these things are important immediately. The activity on the spread of the droplets, definitely. And we've actually got a great video. I think our tech folks at Get Connected have that video pulled up as well that we can show you that will help kind of enhance that spread of the droplets activity too. This could be used as a family engagement opportunity. Yes, definitely. I love that. I think that is something that, we really intended with this material. We wrote this starting at the beginning of the pandemic when kids were home from school and we knew that they were going to be home for a while. I don't think we had any idea quite how long that they would be home. This was an opportunity for young people to engage in some hands-on science learning, but to do it in a way that they could engage with their family members and also in a way that they could support the kind of education of the adults around them as well. Alexa, do we have any more at the top of that column? All right. Thank you to those of you who put some of your ideas and your thoughts in here. Get connected. Can we show that video with the masks and the lasers? And while you're queuing that up, Jan asks, how many languages is this in? It's in 24 languages right now. If there are not languages, there we go, there are the words, that you are looking for, reach out to us. We can talk about other languages that might be useful. All right, so here's a great video. Carol, do you wanna give some narration to this video?
Sure. This video was actually produced fairly early on in COVID-19, sometime in around, I think, April or May. And it is from the New England Journal of Medicine, but came from researchers at MIT. It's very quick, 41 seconds, and it shows an individual who is speaking, talking, coughing softly and loudly with a mask and without a mask. They're using lasers to show and demonstrate the respiratory droplets that come out of your nose and your mouth when you're talking softly or loudly with and without a mask.
So we can go ahead and play.
Now I'm recording.
Stay healthy.
Great,
Stay healthy.
great. Less loud.
Stay healthy.
Good.
Are you recording?
Yeah.
Stay healthy.
Louder.
Stay healthy.
Louder.
Stay healthy.
Nothing.
Yeah, so if I could just add, you know, this is a really powerful 41 seconds. And I think the reason this video is so important is because it demonstrates that mask wearing is probably more about you protecting others than it is about necessarily you protecting yourself from others. So it's, again, back to this idea of the identity map at the beginning and perspective taking. You need students to recognize that the decisions that they're making in wearing a mask are helping to protect others. Because many people who spread the disease are asymptomatic and are not aware that they may be sick.
All right, so I'm gonna head back to our PowerPoint here. We've got one or two more sections that we wanna just cover with you before the end of our time. So the next section is focused on why we teach young people about COVID-19. And I'm gonna turn it over to Carol to talk about some of the science and research of supporting young people to understand COVID-19. So Carol, just tell me when you want the slides changed.
You can go ahead. So, you know, as you can tell, we're extracting the science from the UN Sustainable Development Goals as it relates to COVID-19, but focus very specifically on protective behaviors. And one of the best ways that we think you could become comfortable and students can become comfortable with the changing state of the world, because none of us would have predicted this pandemic or expected it at the beginning of the year, is that to become comfortable with the changing state of the world, you need to arm yourself with knowledge, and certainly scientific knowledge, and then use that scientific knowledge to act, to make a difference in the world. So when we first started sharing this information with our peers, including state education agency leaders, both through the general state education agency and specific offices within the state education agencies, you know, there were one or two who pushed back and said, we will not share this with our students. We think it's too trauma-inducing to talk about COVID-19. And while we respected their viewpoint, I think it was really important for us to dig into the research to find out what are school psychologists, child psychologists, and others saying about why we should talk to kids about COVID-19. And there was a general consensus, and this quote comes from the Mayo Clinic, that honest and accurate discussion with your kids about COVID-19 can help them understand what is happening, relieve some of their fears, make them feel safe, and help them begin to cope. So in addition to protecting themselves and others from the disease, it also alleviates some of those fears. The other reasons about why we should talk to our kids about COVID-19, some organizations, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, for example, says, express empathy and concern. Let children know that you've heard about that scary event, COVID-19, and are available to listen to them and to offer support. In addition, the recommendation is avoid speaking with children about their feelings about a loss is rarely helpful, and it may only further isolate children at a time when they're most in need of support. So I was fortunate enough to be in a meeting, there were about 20 of us, with Dr. Anthony Fauci a couple of months ago, and I asked him point blank, this was a virtual meeting, and I asked him point blank, Dr. Fauci, what's your opinion about whether or not we should educate youth about COVID-19? And his response was that while he's not an educator, I think he is, but while he's not a teacher of young children, he does believe deeply in that first quote, that avoiding speaking with children about their feelings about a loss or about a disease like COVID-19 is rarely helpful and may only further isolate the children or help, they may be fearful because of it. And that the greater loss is losing a parent or a loved one if they weren't protecting themselves. And that's more traumatic. A couple of other quotes, and this is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Provide a safe place for the child to talk about what happened. Set aside a designated time and place for sharing to help the child know that, know it's okay to talk about what happened. Give simple and realistic answers to the child's questions about traumatic events. Clarify distortions and misconceptions. So sometimes children are afraid because others may taunt them because they have a mask on, or may question them because they don't. And it's important for our children to have opportunities to talk to an adult, a significant other, about what they're feeling. Katherine?
Yep, thanks, Carol. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how some other folks have used and engaged with this material as an opportunity for inspiration, but also as an opportunity just to share some of the ways that people are engaging. So the first thing that this material has really done is it's helped to foster conversations. So we have some pre-service teachers in both South Korea and the United States who've been using this module in their education courses to not only start a conversation about COVID-19 and how we teach STEM during this kind of a crisis, but to also look at best practices in STEM education, that role that the hands-on activities play in providing young people with a deeper understanding, and also the role of public health. So, STEM definitely includes public health, even though it's not STEM or anything like that. But it is a great way to help understand how those science, technology, engineering, and math practices that we highlighted throughout the activities also help to support us in the health and well-being of our communities. The second way that this content has been really powerful is by increasing student understanding. So here you see two images of students taking part in task number 2, which is the respiratory droplet task. You see that the kids up above are flicking water against a wall. And this is actually still from a video. So it's basically them, in the wind, trying to get that water to get to the wall, but seeing where the wind is carrying the water instead. And then down below, we have the young woman with her little pot of water and her tape measure, figuring out how far away from the wall she is and how far away that water can travel. So by actually engaging in these activities, kids are finding more robust ways to bolster their knowledge and understanding of things like social distancing, hand washing, mask wearing. And then the final kind of way that this is having an impact is driving youth to that point of taking action. So if you remember back to our learning progression that Carol showed at the beginning, the triangle, where young people are really driven to the point where they can have that agency to be able to take action in their own local communities on big global issues. That's what we're seeing here. So this young man in Mexico created a communication plan that included a TikTok video that he made about wearing masks. It's very cute. I highly recommend it. I didn't actually embed it here, so I can't play it, even though it looks like I can play it. But he has a great little TikTok dance to a song about masks that's to the tune of Another One Bites the Dust. A great way to communicate with his peers. So, you know, certainly everyone that follows him on TikTok is seeing this, but also to communicate generationally as well. So we're having that intergenerational impact by students learning at home with their families, but we're also having that generational impact by kids getting the word out to their friends. All right, so if you choose to use this material, the only thing that we ask of you is that you share what you do. So we've got an impact data form on our website, which you can see right up there, and is very accessible from the COVID-19 landing page that we have. And we would just like to know more about how you're engaging students with this material. And then in addition to that, if you have any photos, videos, written testimonials, student work, I would love if you would email that directly to me with permission to share those materials so that hopefully we can feature some of your youth and students in future presentations like this. And then of course, we would love for you to tag us on social media, finding out kind of how you're using this material as well. And that's really important for us because the only way that we can continue to do this work is by proving that it's impactful and that it's valuable to people. All right, so now is the moment when I'm just going to take a pause for some Q&A. I think we've got plenty of time for Q&A, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat box, and we will go ahead and answer some of those. So I have a question here asking for a link to the mask TikTok. I'm going to go back to slides. This is his handle here. I'll just type it into the chat box. So that you have that information there. All right. Does anyone have questions that they would like to pose in the chat box that we can answer? Ooh, what do you suggest for younger students like kindergarten and first grade to implement this? Riva, that's a great question. So as Carol mentioned, we've been doing this work around the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals since 2016. And we've actually seen teachers implement with much younger students as well. You know, we had one teacher who was supposed to teach third grade, ended up teaching kindergarten, and was able to take some of that material with her. And, you know, certainly there are some things that we can teach our kindergartners and first graders, like washing hands, wearing masks. Some things are harder, keeping social distancing, figuring out the math of contact tracing. But there are definitely, you know, ways to kind of reframe some of the material that's about kind of personal safety and keeping your family safe without getting into as much of the heavy emotional stuff as well, which can be really hard for the young ones to process. Carol, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that?
No,
for
I
younger
no, I think
students?
that's spot on. I mean, this module was designed originally for parents and caregivers to engage with their children. And I think the protective behaviors are the basic protective behaviors. So I think the activities, that's why it spans such a wide range. But the kinds of questions that students come up with in the Discover section will really drive their knowledge. So the older they are, the more complex those questions become, and the deeper they'll dive into the science. And so I think being able to do this with young children is absolutely possible.
Awesome. I've got another question here about if the module covers what masks are best to use. And so, Diana, that's definitely something that we didn't specifically cover. As we mentioned, we wrote this in, April and May at the very beginning of the pandemic. There was still a lot of questions around the science of some of these topics. So we certainly left it open to, to investigate and implement those sort of local public health best practices. So your state or local government may have some guidance on masks. I know that the CDC has some guidance on masks as well that you can definitely pull and implement. The other thing that we can do is, have kids do the experiment themselves on which masks are better to use. I saw a great video, which I think came from Cuba, of someone using an aerosol spray can and seeing which different masks the aerosol actually moved through, which could be a great extension to use here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of the statements around 3 layers are important. This comes from the CDC and WHO. 3 layers are important. A cotton layer that comes close to your face, but then the outer layer is somewhat water repellent, and that makes sense, right? These are respiratory droplets, they're water droplets. And so those are the masks I bought. I looked for 3-ply, I looked for water repellent, water resistant on the outside.
Yeah, and that's a very educated decision that Carol made, based on all the information that she received. I do want to kind of reiterate that we're not public health officials. So at the end of the day, like, any advice that we give is based on our personal experiences. And we definitely encourage you to look at what your own public health best practices are in your area. And then Levon says that the PowerPoint was very concise and easy to follow to implement. Excellent, Levon. I'm glad to hear that. I hope that this is useful to you. All right. Do folks have other questions that they'd like us to answer? We've got just a couple more minutes here.
So one thing I'm not certain, Katherine, whether or not you have the slide with the extra resources.
Here it is.
So we wanted to make certain to provide to you, the Smithsonian has a lot of resources, but because of the way this particular conference is structured around emotional health and well-being, equity and inclusion, engineering mindset, environmental and outdoor education, entrepreneurship, we wanted to make certain to provide to you resources from our center at the Smithsonian that could address each of these issues. In addition, we wanted, and so you'll get this link with all of these resources in it. In addition, we wanted to just thank, which is really important to do, our funders. And this project would absolutely not be possible without the support of our donors and our contributors. So the World Health Organization and the Inter-Academy Partnership as our partners, but our donors, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, Michael and Nancy Baudin Foundation, Ann B. Kaiser and Douglas Lapp and their foundation, the Secretary of the Smithsonian, who pitched in, and the Smithsonian San Francisco Regional Council. We're very, of course, wouldn't be able to do this and provide this resource for free if it weren't for the support of others. So if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to let Katherine and I know. Our information is here.
And I would also like to, give a big thank you to the organizers of this conference who invited us to be here with you today, and also to Alexa for doing all of our great behind the scenes tech support. All right. So if you do have other questions, feel free to email us. I can hold on for a couple of minutes here to answer anything else that's going to come up. But thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a great day. Go eat some lunch. LA, if you email me, I can send you the video of the TikTok. All right.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, folks. Have a great afternoon.